right, welcome back, everyone. This is going to be for students, episode 3 of the PAHS interview series. For everybody else watching, this is episode 35 of the Orchestra podcast, and we have our first return guest, Dr. Thomas Dickey. Thank you so much for coming back. We are excited to hear about what your plans are down in Oklahoma. So tell us a little bit about how orchestra is going to work for you.
Well, not to toot my own horn, but things are going really very well at Oklahoma State University. I was prepared for a wide variety of scenarios, mainly ranging from strings only, strings in a small number of winds, big orchestra, but rehearsing in this huge ballroom or outdoor space, or completely online. And we were very fortunate to have pretty much our normal rehearsal schedule, but with limited class size. And so I've divided the orchestra into like a philharmonic, smaller number of strings, smaller number of winds, so we can still do full orchestra repertoire, and then a slightly larger strings only group, primarily for our incoming freshmen, and then the non-music majors. And, you know, Nathan, I won't lie, I was expecting the first day to be rusty, dusty, cobwebby, etc. But I think because it had been like 5-6 months since we had seen each other last, we had been able to make music together. It was actually one of the best rehearsals I have had thus far. The energy in the room was just palpable. You just felt that thirst, you know, that hunger for music making, and, you know, for that collectivity and community and so forth. I was expecting it to be a very difficult rehearsal with, you know, everybody being so far apart. You know, I was expecting like phasing on the marching band field. But even with the freshman string group, we didn't have any of that. It was oddly together, and if anything, I felt as though they could actually hear each other better because they were a little bit more spaced apart. Everybody was incredibly independent. You know, one person on a stand, no stand partners to lean on, and so forth. And we've actually had really great rehearsals. We go 30 minutes with winds only, and then the winds are dismissed, and then the strings stick around for another 15-minute sectional. We clear the room, 15 minutes, let the air, you know, clear itself out, and then the second orchestra meets for 45 minutes after that. And although they've been shorter rehearsals, we're used to the 130 to 320 with a 5 to 10 minute break. It's forced us to be really productive in a short amount of time. And they've had now 3 weeks of fantastic rehearsals. I'm almost waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop, as it were, but knock on wood, things are going really very well. I do have a couple of students who, for health reasons or various reasons that I don't need to know about, are not able to be in orchestra this semester, or have decided, you know, not to play physically. And I told them that was fine. There are no penalties for not playing your instrument this semester, but it's allowed me and the student to find other sorts of projects or ways that they could be a part of the orchestra without necessarily holding a violin or something like that. And so I've got one student who's really interested in arts admin, and I've got her preparing a project on how the arts in general, but especially orchestras, are handling, you know, COVID-19. How are they finding clever and inventive ways to survive this pandemic? I've got another student who's really more interested in music industry, executive management, that sort of thing. And so we're coming up with all sorts of projects to do on a weekly basis, ranging from interviews with current and recent students, my sort of what I'm calling keeping score with Dr. Dickey, like one of these podcasts or tutorials for the students to learn more about the score than we can, you know, tell them about in just, you know, 45 minutes of rehearsal. And so on and so forth. So it's forced me as a professor to be really creative, besides just, well, I'm going to pull these pieces, we're going to rehearse, we're going to play concerts, and it's going to be great. And I really like that because it's also forced me to be creative with my repertoire selection. Like when you can only fit 30 people in the room at the max, and that has to include, you know, some flutes, some oboes, etc. You really rack your brains as to what pieces are out there.
Oh, absolutely. As I was, you know, looking through J.W. Pepper and my own music library for what are we going to do this year, and you know, I was really racking my brain about what do I put on the stands that after 5-6 months of not playing, you know, I think it's important that students can read through a piece the first time, even if, you know, there's some bumps and lumps that's going to happen. But it's really important that you can get through the piece and still maintain some level of excellence and fun for the kids. Because if you know, if we go back to playing, you know, gauntlet at the beginning of the year. At high school, even though they could probably do it pretty well, that it's not really pushing them to the next level. So finding that gray area in between and cutting it down the middle. But also, if things go as planned, what I'm hoping to do to get some rehearsals together is have kids broken out into cohorts of 5, 2 violins, viola, cello, bass, because at least in the county that we're in Washington State, we can have 5 people together in a gathering.
Okay.
And technically the audience counts as a separate room. So if Mr. Rodall is off in the audience, we haven't broken any rules yet. But getting everybody in cohorts to rehearse in like maybe 15 minutes at a time, and trying to make that work outside of the school day. And you can't necessarily require that they show up because it's outside of the school day. I can require concerts. So if we're doing a recording of their thing, but anyhow, when I was picking the repertoire, keeping that in mind is that's sort of my best case scenario rehearsal strategy right now.
Yeah.
No Divisi. We can't have any Divisi in the parts unless it's like open strings doable. So that totally changed the music that I was going to pick for the fall. I definitely went with things that were rhythmic and exciting, because I think more than anything, we, like you said, the magic that was in the room at that first rehearsal, we want to get back to playing music together. Absolutely. And the orchestra teachers here in Port Angeles put a little video together. I don't know if you saw that one. It's been floating around Facebook.
I think so.
Just a proof of concept for our administrators of what it would look like to have 5 on stage. And it was definitely not the best playing that I've done in my musical career, having not played for so long. But it was, like you said, kind of a new magic to it that hadn't been there before. And I hope our students see that when they, at least my students, when they get to their first rehearsal, which is still kind of TBD. But I loved hearing that you guys can rehearse in person. And I like that you've given students an option to do something else and pursuing interests outside of just music performance, because there are all kinds of jobs in the music industry that are pretty high paying and fulfilling, depending on your particular interest. So what, if any, advice could you give to my kids of projects that they might want to pursue as far as careers in music go? What might I plan that I haven't thought of yet?
Well, something that's become a passion of mine is the idea of music and social justice, finding ways, either to keep music a part of that or finding ways to integrate music and social justice movements. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement means a lot to me. And so, just investigating more about composers of color, finding ways to champion their music, increase the visibility of those composers. I love the idea of course, like music and medicine, music and therapy, music and law, almost anything entrepreneurial that you can think of. I say go for it. We're fortunate to be at a time where it's no longer just you either stand on the podium or you sit in the ensemble. There are so many other ways for you to keep music a part of your life, or find new ways to make music a part of people's lives. And I think now more than ever, we have to have the arts, music in particular, so socially relevant. Now is not the time, although I love Beethoven, this is his 25th anniversary. Now, in my opinion, is not the time to be just doing Beethoven ad nauseum. Now is the time to be really thinking outside the box, finding those compositions that were written during quarantine or being set up for ensembles who are really quite far apart, or these unusual instrumentations, or lifting up and celebrating Black composers. Now is the time to be doing that more than ever.
Well, and that's something that I've been wondering about in our community, our classical music community, is when you turn on Netflix or Hulu or whatever your streaming service is, the front banner is something about celebrating Black voices or celebrating African American film. When I open up J.W. Pepper, it's just no offense against Richard Meyer, he writes some great tunes, but it's still just top 5 selling pieces. And I would love to see, like, I managed to find on Pepper an arrangement of a piece by Florence Price I've ordered and purchased, but it's the only one. I mean, there's nothing for string orchestra. They have one. I think it's the old Boatman, and it's a piano piece that had been arranged, but there's only one of them. And I can't find anything by George Walker on there. I mean, that's more for my chamber orchestra than for my freshman or for the non-auditioned group. And that brings up a huge problem that I think we have an easy solution to, especially for those of you who are in academia, is that there's not a whole lot of accessible student level music, even at the high school, like grade 3, grade 4, music by composers of color. And something that I've heard many times from my friends who I've asked about, what can a white male do to try and promote some justice and equality here, and especially when it comes to music programming. Because I was trying to look up an arrangement of Lift Every Voice to do at the end of last year, and there is one, but it's by Bob Phillips. So he's done great work, and of course he did it years and years ago, and he just saw it in the Lutheran hymnal, which it's in there in the old green book. But I really wanted something authentic, and so I asked my friends, and what do they say? Just ask. Find somebody out there who is writing music, is a person of color, and wants to write a piece for your group. Ask. And then on the school orchestra teachers Facebook page, which continues to be a font of wisdom and knowledge, sometimes confusion, but usually wisdom in the end, is something that the band people have been doing for a long time, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is getting together in groups of like 20 or 30 schools and saying $100 to enter into this commission, and the composer gets like way more than they would have gotten from any one group, and the school gets to be on the top of the piece of music that we commissioned this work for just $100, which is maybe 2.5 pieces from J.W. Pepper, but a unique piece of music that you commissioned by a person of color that is like tailor-made to your ensemble.
Absolutely. And if you or a student has like some strong skills with like finale or is interested in arranging and orchestration projects, then I would say do what I did. One of my secret instruments I play is the organ, and I love Florence Price's organ music. One of her beautiful adagios is called Adoration. And over the summer, I took it upon myself to transcribe it for strings.
And now that makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and based on the way that she wrote it, I kid you not, Nathan, it can be played entirely in first position for every instrument.
Wow.
So my goal is after the concert, when I send it off to publishers, to really stress, like, I think this could be done by like 7th graders, 8th graders, even, and you don't have to be, the top high school orchestra to play this composition. It's slow, it's pretty, it goes D major, G major, return to A major, 4/4 time, nothing hard rhythmically, but it's just gorgeous. And the harmonies, I've got that like 1930s, 1940s, blues feel every now and then. And I decided to have it played on the September concert in memoriam of those who passed away due to COVID-19. Of course, we could have done the Barbara Adagio, we could have done Elgar's Nimrod, but I thought
that's been done before.
Exactly, and this hasn't. And I was so touched when I had my Facebook post about this is what we're doing. I transcribed it. So many people have private messaged me about, show me the score. I want to do this piece too. Because like you said, when you go online, you're not going to really find anything available for purchase, certainly not for rental cheap. Like George Walker's Lyric Suite, wonderful, quite challenging though.
Yes.
Ulysses K. Silva, I think, or Ulysses Silva K, one of the two, wrote some wonderful music for student orchestras, but it's all rental. And right now, for some reason, a lot of publishers are just like making it more difficult to rent, or the process is taking longer, the fees have gone up. And I'm like, folks, now is not the time to be making life harder for public school, instrumental music programs.
Well, yes. And to that point, I have been asked to complete a commission on a certain symphonic overture by a certain New York Phil conductor.
Mhm.
And we're still waiting for the copyright to go through our favorite rental company, Boozy and Hawks, who, for whatever reason, would love to make it impossible for people to play the music that they own.
Yeah.
Not really sure what that's about. But yet there's even the, like, where I'm trying to go with this, the George Walker Lyric Suite or symphonic works by Samuel Coleridge Taylor could be arranged and made suitable to an intermediate learning ensemble. If the publishers, not necessarily the families of these composers, if they are deceased, because they're usually done controlling these things.
Yeah.
And I think being the amateur composer that I am, when I've left this world, I'm not making money on it anymore, and hopefully I've done well enough for any family I have that they don't need dividends from music I wrote 80 years ago. I think the music community wants that music to be played, and if it's not being played, we're not serving. Certainly, we're not serving the composer, and we're definitely not serving the music. I'm all about the paying the people that did the editing to make it possible to, like music by Fanny Mendelssohn that is only made playable because of the recent work of editors who dug out the scores and made parts from the scores and made things legible and because of them we have access to the music. They deserve to be paid for their work. But there is an issue of access, especially when we're trying to provide what's the word I'm looking for? Not just a model, but examples of people in music who are people of color for our students to see, regardless of what your demographic is where you teach. Port Angeles is a very white place, but I think that makes it even more important that when I have the opportunity to celebrate Black voices or Japanese voices or Hispanic voices, that I provide that opportunity so that they're not just in our little shell of Port Angeles, not learning about what's outside of our bubble.
I think it's going to take something like Sandra Dacko. I adore her arrangements. They are so true to the original. They've got, I'm thinking like all the Tchaikovsky arrangements of hers.
Oh, yes.
They're watered down just enough, but not too much so. They got all the rhythm and the bite and the drive and so forth. I think it's going to take a big name like her, maybe a Bob Phillips, to get that conversation going with, the Coleridge Taylor family. And then start this whole new series of like Samuel Coleridge Taylor adapted by Sandy Dacko, and it'll sell like hotcakes, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
Like, she would be perfect because you know how so much of his music is like Tchaikovsky-like or Dvorak or Elgar-like.
Mm-hmm.
I think she could totally transcribe it very well, make it appropriate for all levels, maybe even having like two versions. I mean, I was thinking about even having two versions of my adoration piece, one that could be played first position for 7th and 8th graders, and then one that maybe has more Debussy or alternate fingerings for higher positions, for those more advanced ensembles. And I am a very amateur orchestrator, but I think it's going to take somebody who has far greater skill, somebody who has the time to do that, and somebody whose name carries such gravitas that when you get that email from Lux saying da 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 by Sandra Dacko, people are going to buy it sight unseen. I think that's what it's really going to take, because I love the idea of commissions and consortiums, but how great would it be if like there was this one piece or several pieces that are being played across the country? They eventually made their way to the state repertoire list, or they were being performed at honors and whole state orchestras.
Yeah.
And it's going to take that name to be associated with, not this, once, commission piece, I think.
Well, and if one of those names happens to be watching, I hope that they will, along with this consortium and the first couple editions, that they have the selling power to put out, that they invite some new voices that aren't the same couple of, men and women too. We are blessed in the orchestra world to have many composers, arrangers who are women that really are selling well and are high-powered educators that know what our kids need. But to invite along with them on this cash cow that it could be, some real authentic voices to arrange and transpose, reorchestrate this music.
Yeah. That's going to be a perfect opportunity, I think, to get these conversations going also in the classroom. I think we're at a time when people think, I can't teach orchestra if, we're not face to face and have instruments in our hands. We can totally teach music in other sorts of ways, or we can set aside time to have these really thoughtful dialogues and conversations about, various social justice issues.
And
Why not do it by
I'm
music? Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. This whole
Okay.
Zoom thing is still so hard.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity to try out the flipped classroom model.
Yes.
So, if we can't rehearse in person in Washington at the time being, I think we waiting on approval, but probably we'll be able to get groups of 5 in, here and there. And I'm looking forward to that. That's sort of the big shining star that I'm looking forward to at the end of the tunnel. But just asking students what interests you, and if you don't know what interests you, then let's look at all the facets of music that you didn't even know existed.
Exactly.
I am very lucky to be somebody who has played music down south with a bunch of bands, and I played with the Opry House Band very briefly for a summer, and I've kind of seen behind the curtain, having done some studio work in a very not classical setting, and seeing the way that when you see how the sausage is made, to use an antiquated term, it's a lot that requires musical knowledge, and you definitely can't leave your ensemble class. But it's a career where the parts of the ensemble class that maybe you didn't like so much aren't really part of your work, but it's still this necessary trajectory of your music education. And hopefully, if we're providing all these different options and avenues for careers in music, some of which you may not have known existed or that were available to you, that we will have inspired a new spark in music, a new buy-in, because we have this time to pursue, other projects. And I love that you've invited, individuals to kind of create your own adventure.
Yeah.
And I hope to offer the same to my students. If you're one of the people who doesn't want to come in and play with the group of 5, I can't penalize you for not wanting to do that. Or if there's a health concern, I have to honor that when we do come back together to have all 109 symphonic orchestra students on stage at the same time. I want it to be 109. I don't want it to be 108 because we were careless.
Right.
So anyhow, that long ramble, but I think that puts a bow on it for the interview part of the conversation that's for students. I wonder if you have any parting words for the Port Angeles Orchestra kids.
Parting words of wisdom. My goodness. I guess I would really stress to your students that this time apart hopefully has made you realize how much music means to you, and how much this 5 month of this gap, this gulf in your heart of, if you don't come back to it, it's only going to get bigger and bigger. And like what you're a part of right now, this music making, this connecting with others, this speaking this language without words, is one of the most powerful things that we can have in our lives right now. So stay with it and find a way to keep it a part of your life, please.
Great parting words of wisdom. I tell my students all the time, when we're going through something challenging in our lives or something challenging in the world, when we're holding our instruments, whether it be bassoon or violin or piano or organ, that for those 3-5 minutes, or if you're doing a Mahler symphony at 90 minutes, that nothing else has to matter except for the music on the stand and the people around you. And it can be somebody whose personal beliefs you completely, utterly disagree with, and you can still make beautiful music with them, despite everything that separates you, and that is your common ground. And it, for that time that you're playing, is one of the few healthy escapes from reality, temporary escape from reality, to just kind of focus in. And I find when you get into that flow state of, conducting a piece that so well, a song that you've done like 30 times and you've been rehearsing it, all year, you can kind of just close your eyes and let the music happen, is you'll find answers to totally unrelated questions. It's like the idea that comes to you, while walking the dog or washing the dishes.
Exactly.
And by just letting the music take over, you can find some answers to some of those questions that your heart is really looking for, especially in a difficult time, as this one. So at this point, we'll go ahead and say goodbye to the students who are cordially required to watch this video. And we'll move on with some more discussion for teachers and any students who are, well, frankly, nerdy enough to be interested in such a conversation. And I congratulate those students for being, having such aptitudes. So bye to all the kids, and hello to the rest of the teachers who hopefully were already listening. I'm just racked with what are we supposed to do to the kids who are really tuning out right now. Because part of me says you don't want to beg and plead a student who doesn't want to be in your orchestra to stay, but there's another part of me that knows if I don't, keep track of my numbers, I'm in trouble looking at the next year and the year after that. So what can orchestra teachers do to try and keep kids engaged, or maybe even have that no, please don't go conversation with students who are kind of having a hard time feeling inspired right now, especially when we can't meet in person?
I think we have to find ways to still play music with those students. Maybe they're not in the room, and maybe they're doing like Zoom like we are, or maybe they're doing like the a cappella app and they're doing a project like just themselves or something like that. Because I would bet that it's probably more like the safety, the health concern of being in the room. And we totally respect that, we understand that. But finding ways like, okay, let's set aside 30 minutes or even 15, whenever we can, let's just the two of us, let's play. Or I'm gonna bring in the other members from the class and we're gonna set aside time and we're gonna play the music and we wanna hear how you sound or what your contribution is. Or maybe find a way to play the piece without that, let's say it's the viola part, without the violist. Now, do you hear how different that is without you, how much you are bringing to this piece? Or what a great contribution you bring. Now let's play with all of us, and then we, relish and cherish this, completed, artwork, as it were. That probably would be where I start. I mean, I think all of those, the orchestra that are those big digital projects, they've got the click tracks in their ears.
And those are so hard.
I mean, that's so much work. But I think finding ways, something as simple as let's log into Google Hangout or Zoom or whatnot, and let's just make some music, long distance, and then go from there and talk about what we just did. I would venture to say that would be a very meaningful experience to that student, and then for them to hear how much they actually contribute. I think it's so tempting in a larger program like yours to go, oh, it's okay, he doesn't need me, he's got 108 others. Well, actually,
every single person is important. Absolutely.
Exactly. And finding ways to remind every student that you make a contribution. You may not feel it, but you do. And actually, here's an audio example of the contribution that you make. I think that'd be a great first place to start. Absolutely.
Yes, I'm at a loss for words. That's exactly what we all have to do, and hopefully the announcements, I've heard one from Zoom and another app called Upbeat, where they are allegedly saying that they've solved the latency problem.
Oh, I've heard rumors too. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it.
These are just rumors, but I'll believe it when I see it. And I was thinking about it the other day of like video games. If they can have people playing video games online together, I mean, not that I engage in such, violent tribble, but if Call of Duty people, if they are, playing this, really high-paced game where you have to, line up a sniper scope with somebody else's head in real time, they must have solved the latency problem, because none of that would work if there was a non-latency software running in the background. They figured it out. So we've got to, as soon as we possibly can, figure out how to solve the latency issue for rehearsal settings. And maybe that means there isn't video, like you enter rehearsal mode and there's no video. I'm fine with that. I'll review video later if it, saves internally. And I've even, for my own curriculum, I used to require that you do your playing test for me in video format, so that I know it's you and not, your older brother or, some college kid you paid $20 to play your, But I think at this point, I know each kid's sound well enough that I kind of know what they sound. And if they all of a sudden sound a lot better, I can probably make a phone call to mom or dad and figure out what's going on. But switching to audio only, and I think there's a lot of kids, like I'm sure in your first couple of Zoom meetings, you found a lot of turned off cameras. And that we don't know what that reason is with each individual and what on that particular day. It might just be, I didn't have time to put my makeup on. It might be, the house is a mess and I don't want people to know where I live. It might be, I've just had a good cry before we started because I wish we were playing with my friends. So I think teachers need to maybe let go of the camera on policies. I've seen some of these floating around in handbooks and syllabi on the school orchestra teachers page about requiring cameras to be on. And I think honestly, you don't want to fight that battle. And honestly, as an educator, it really would protect you if everybody's camera was off anyway. If you're the only face on the screen. And some of us are being required to use like Google Meets, or I forget what the Microsoft equivalent is. They have something that isn't Zoom. Zoom really has a lot of privacy controls. There was initially some concerns with the security of Zoom, but I think after like a month, the Zoom had like totally locked it down. But like Google has like none of the security features. Like the kids can send each other private chats and you don't see them. Whereas in Zoom, there are no private chats for the host. So if you're a person out there who's going into a workshop and think you can bash the moderator while you're just talking to your friend, well, they're going to see that. So I don't know where I'm going with this all, but what advice do you have for us orchestra teachers who really don't have a lot of choice in the way that we're engaging with students?
Boy, that's a tough question, because I've been trying to make a purpose or be more purposeful in reaching out to some of my peers, be it here in Oklahoma or down in Texas, and just asking, so what are you doing? How are things going? What can I do to help? And sometimes the response I get is, like, I'm going a day at a time, or we're taking this 1 week at a time, or we're waiting to hear more about the science, or we're waiting for this. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, then I'm at a loss. Then I'm at a loss, because a lot of school districts, like for example in Oklahoma, if the student opts in for virtual learning, then they can't be a part of orchestra. If they want to be an orchestra, they have to come face to face. And so maybe finding a way for administrators to be a little bit more flexible in that capacity, that the class doesn't have to necessarily be a face-to-face participation. Now, we would need to have some sort of quality control. You could very easily have it where everybody's an orchestra, but online. And we don't want to have that happen. Like maybe there has to be a form or a conversation or something like that. But I would say finding ways to be as flexible to like meet the student in the middle, meet the family in the middle. It might be whatever issue at home, might be bad Wi-Fi, it might be who knows what, but finding ways to meet in the middle would probably be my best guess. I'm just so fortunate that we get to do face-to-face. We have a larger room limit. 30 is much better than 5. So I count my blessings every day that I've had 3 weeks of rehearsals. I get to see 60 students over the course of 2 hours. We're doing music ranging from Schubert 5 to Florence Price. So,
yeah,
man.
Well,
I wish I had a better answer, Nathan. I'm so sorry.
Well, it brings up a good point. And it's something that we need to have for ourselves and with each other, and something that we need to ask of our administrators and of our families as well, is for a little bit of grace. especially for those of us who are kind of in those waiting places where we're waiting for an answer. I feel I've spent March just waiting, always waiting. And then I get an answer and it leads to another question that involves waiting. And I hope our students have that grace with us, because as we mentioned in the earlier part of the podcast, this is new to us too.
Yeah.
And we are, I don't know about you, but I'm spending more time in the office than I've ever spent my entire career trying to figure out how to put something together that's meaningful. And even that is, I'm just creating options that are on this list of maybes that I'm waiting on. So when a student asks me, what is orchestra going to be like this year? I have to say, I don't know, but I'm doing my best to make meaningful experiences in music. That's all I can really commit to right now.
Yeah. And, I would stress to teachers, just know that you are not alone in this, even at the collegiate level. It is testing our pedagogical chops in ways I never envisioned. And I'm not even 40. I'm just a couple years away. And the amount of time I have spent preparing, be it lectures, be it orchestra rehearsals, it is astounding, to the point where it's actually been overwhelming at times. And then when students bemoan, like, oh, it's not the same, or I should only have to pay half his tuition. Of course, you guys don't have to pay tuition for orchestra, but there's that element of, well, it's not the same, and so I shouldn't have to pay the full price. And it's like the reality is, yes, it is not the same, but the teacher is preparing so many alternatives, being prepared for so many scenarios, the countless hours they're spending, for that one rehearsal or that one lecture that you just had. I would say teachers take comfort in knowing that everybody's in this boat, including, academics. It's overwhelming, even for academics. And, we also hope that this is a very short-lived situation, because, 3 weeks can turn it, or it can be like 3 months, when you're putting in so many hours, and then you start to neglect your own personal health, you're neglecting your own mental health and so forth, because it means so much to us, and we want it to still be, viable, and vital to our students, that we put so much extra time into it to make it seem like, oh, I'm rolling with the punches, it's no big deal. And the reality is I'm barely keeping up with the punches, and it's a huge deal, and I feel totally overwhelmed. And I can't help but wonder what would happen if, like, for example, Oklahoma, they're kind of doing a district at a time. Each school district gets to make its own decisions. What if we think a little bit beyond that and are having these bigger conversations with our orchestra colleagues across other districts or across other states? I mean, clearly we're not going to have all region, all city, all whatever, but that doesn't mean that we can't be resources for each other.
Yes.
And find ways. I would guarantee that there's somebody in whatever part of Oklahoma who's doing something I haven't even thought of, and it's probably a brilliant idea, and vice versa. And I'm sure there are things that I'm doing that I just take for granted, that if I tell some other colleague, they'll go, oh, that's awesome, let me write that down, that's awesome. And so if we can get to that point where we are not afraid to ask for help or have these conversations over Zoom of what are you finding helpful. I mean, there will always be those handful of orchestra teachers who are just sharing so much on social media, and there are going to be tons who aren't even on social media, or for whatever reasons right now aren't even going there for various reasons, and the last thing they're going to do is comb through looking for orchestra advice. But finding ways to be good colleagues to one another across the districts, across state lines, I think would be a wonderful thing for all of us to be doing, regardless of the grade level we teach.
Something that I was really proud of being part of in my last job, which was in Puyallup, which is the third largest district in the state of Washington. And so we had 7 or 8 orchestra teachers in the whole district. And a couple of them were band converts, basically. And so I suggested, well, all this PLC time when, maybe we're going to be talking about English standards from last year compared to this year, maybe can we use that time? Because if I'm the only orchestra teacher in the building, when we have PLC time, well, I don't have a professional learning community, that's a professional learning self. Yep. And so the orchestra teachers once a month, and then 3 hours at either end of the school year, would meet to just talk about how's it going, what are you planning, what are your struggles, and the more veteran orchestra string playing teachers had lots of advice for the band person who is in a string situation of what to do, what resources you need, and you're going to take private lessons whether you like it or not, and we're going to make sure that you do.
Yep.
And we'll even provide a person for you to take those lessons with if you are having a hard time. But if we can blow that up and make it even bigger, hopefully wherever you are, if you're not doing that kind of thing, meeting with other orchestra teachers in your own district, hopefully you start doing that. I have made a point this year, something that I tried to get off the ground last year, but my first year in a new district, you don't, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets replaced, not the grease. So trying to not be too squeaky of a wheel. But this year, something I'm really advocating for is allowing some time for not just orchestra colleagues, but for the band team to meet and talk to each other. Because like our elementary band person is the only elementary band teacher and goes to all 5 elementary schools.
Wow.
There's only 5,
yeah.
But goes to all 5 throughout the week. Just give me a moment here. I think I have somebody knocking. Okay, we are back, and I don't quite remember where we were because I got hit by 4 different students who came by to see me, and the band teacher who looked at me and said, "Oh, I'll bother you later."
I think we were talking about advice for public school teachers and resources, like
yes,
old veterans and the newbies.
So this like PLC time is like step 1. And if you are a person like me, in Washington, it's a rare situation, but I know in places like Texas and places like Indiana or maybe along the East Coast where my situation is a little more normal, where the orchestra program is the largest, or at least of a considerable size, that you encourage your colleagues, even if their program maybe isn't the thing that people know your school for, that you put them in touch with their colleagues too. So it's orchestra teachers have a team, band teachers have a team, choir teachers have a team, and then within your building, you're still going to have those, cordially required meetings where you're meeting with your whole staff, which is important. I went most of last year, and because I have 1 period at the middle school, I wasn't at a lot of the high school staff meetings and didn't get to see a lot of the faces of my colleagues my first year in the building. And that's something that's really important to me, is to establish a relationship with my colleagues, because we teach the same kids.
Yeah.
If I've got a question about, so-and-so seems like they were a little off today. Did you hear anything in, history class? Well, let's go talk to the English teacher. Oh, well, I heard, and you can put the story together and be this team of support for a student, and that is going to become even more important for those of us who can't meet in person, because our students have some of our students have some really challenging things to work through in their home lives. I have many students who are taking jobs right now because mom and dad need help just to keep a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. And even though that really makes me sad, I wish there were more avenues for them to get support, whatever that looks like in your schema. I understand that that's the choice that they have to make to survive. And we've, as teachers, got to have flexibility with those students and understand their situation. And if they come to us for help, we need to listen and provide what help we can. I'm sure you don't deal with the girl drama quite as much at the collegiate level. Certainly some. I did choir while I was in college, and there was plenty of drama to go around there. Although, like you, I took organ lessons in college, and that was sort of my release from any drama at all in the organ studio. Not too much drama amongst the organist, except for you registered that how? You put an Ashimad on Bach? What's wrong with you? That was as much as drama as we got as organ students. But I wonder if you might talk for a minute about some of the social and emotional needs that students will have. And either your own or just as you look across the country at orchestra programs, how can we address those needs as orchestra teachers? What is our place as an orchestra teacher to address the social and emotional needs of our students?
Excellent question, Nathan. And I'm very fortunate at OSU. We have so many great resources just like on campus that we can at least like direct students to, because sometimes it'll be very tempting, I think, for us like as professors to want to either just automatically shut that out and say, this is not my expertise, you need to go over to that building, or to go to the opposite and say, oh, please come to me first and let me help you as best I can. But perhaps the answer is maybe somewhere in the middle, like, let's talk about this, let's get this conversation going. Okay, now I'm also going to direct you over to XYZ resources. Because our training is in music, it is not in psychology, psychiatry, mental health, etc. And like we can be sounding posts, we can be ears, we can be shoulders to cry on, but I think we walk a very fine line of offering like solid medical advice and recommendations, and perhaps it's better to know where to send students in the meanwhile, know what various links they should click on, tutorials they should go watch online, whatever resources there might be.
But we should
Exactly.
feel honored that
Yeah.
students come to us as music teachers, even at the college level. My weekly private lesson with Dr. Sven Ronning was frequently as much therapy as it was, working on violin technique. And his favorite joke was always, "I'm not that kind of doctor."
Yeah.
Uh, and to your point, there we do need to be careful of, especially if you are a male teacher out there, that whatever is coming in, that you are listening, that you are hearing what the student needs to tell you, but that when it gets beyond your expertise, that you know what the resource is that you need to reach out for or direct the student to next, and having that conversation with, I want to be able to hear you, and you can bring whatever you need to bring to me. Uh, but as far as advice in that particular situation, I need to direct you to somebody who is empowered to actually, help you. Uh,
Sure.
because I can just give you my 2 cents and that's worth what it is. But if I put you in touch with, the school psychologist or a county social worker or something, they can like get you access to services. Whereas I can just give you my, dribble, whatever my advice happens to be about your situation. And I, especially with high school students, for those of you out there watching who are high school orchestra teachers, there is a fine line that you kind of have to weasel out of what is just drama, what is just talk, and what is like a serious cry for help. My first assignment back in March was just orchestra check-in so that I could count you as present. And all you had to do was email me 1, 2, or 3, just the number 1, the number 2, or the number 3. And the number 1 means you're doing great. You're excited for the next assignment to come out, but you don't need any help from Mr. Rodall. 2 is I have okay days, I have bad days, but I don't need help. I'm doing okay. Uh, but if maybe we could have a conversation at some point, but I'm doing fine. And 3 is I would like to be put in touch with someone I can trust. And that's exactly the way I worded it. I would like to be put in touch with someone that I can trust. Because not, all, 213 of my students are, the kid that I have the greatest relationship with, or nor am I the teacher that maybe they trust the most. But our students need to know that whether we are that person for you or not, that there are services out there. And if you're a teacher and you don't know what services are available to you, like just ask your school counselor or whoever is that person in your building, because there are national resources if your state doesn't have them. Just to I think there's even an app now called BetterHelp. I don't know if you've heard about this.
No, that's
Uh,
new. I like it.
it's a free app that with in-app purchases, of course. But if you are in like a very at-risk situation, that you can be in touch via text or call or video with an actual licensed medical professional.
Nice.
And I think the educators, as much as the students, need to know that those services are out there, and as you say, know when to pass the buck, and not in a sort of selfish way of like, you don't want to like make a problem go away, but there comes a point where, as you say, it's outside of your expertise.
Right, and that's actually something that we as faculty have, in those first couple of days of training, all those lengthy sessions that we have to go. One of them is like all the various resources on campus, and like they kind of give us this like recommendation, like a flow chart almost, like when is appropriate for you to be a part of this, and at what point should you actually pass it off. And I would say, especially at the high school level, that surely public school districts have some really clear guidelines about what is appropriate conversation, at what point does it have to get turned over to someone, a more professional individual. Because I think we as teachers, we always come back to these lines we walk. We want students to respect us, of course, but we don't want them to be afraid of us. We want us to feel relatable, but we also don't want to be perceived as like their friend, because we also have grades, and assess their playing, and if they get low marks on whatever playing test, it's like, oh, I thought we were friends. How could
now
you
they feel
Dickey?
Wounded. Yeah.
And so when I first started teaching, I was only 5 years older than my students, and now I'm however many more years older than that. And so it's becoming less of an issue as I age. I remember feeling very self-conscious about that distance between me and my students, and I probably went the opposite direction of like, no, like we are not even going to talk about that, or like, you can get into my office, but the door will always be opened. There will be like a second witness, etc. Because it was not a risk I was willing to take as a first year teacher under the age of 30. It was just not going to happen. But I try where possible, either in lessons, in rehearsals, etc., to try to share a little bit about myself, usually in the form of a quick anecdote to let them know that, once upon a time when I was your age back in the 1900s, I felt blah, 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 or I went through whatever experience. So they know that even Dr. Dickey got a rejection letter, even Dr. Dickey got, turned down from whatever school, or even Dr. Dickey, experienced whatever heartache in high school, that, there is a heart inside that conductor, and it does beat a couple times a minute, and the blood temperature is 98 point something. But other than that, I try to keep somewhat of a distance, just because of the nature of the position I have of being instructor of record, the one who also has to write letters of recommendation for jobs or grad schools, that I want them to know some about me and to be able to relate to me on a certain level, but there still also has to be quite a distance, and I will jokingly say, I'll tell you the rest of that story when you're an alum. Like when you're no longer under my care, I'll be happy to tell you the rest of how that went, just because of where I am in my career still.
Well, and it is important that as any educator, that you take at least one opportunity to show yourself as vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that you open up the forum for somebody who needs some help or needs to have a vulnerable moment, that you are a person that they can be vulnerable with, and not feel afraid or ashamed. But we need to be careful about how vulnerable do we make ourselves, how far do we go with that, and that we allow it to just be those 1 or 2 moments throughout the school year that assure the kids that we are available to be that the ear for the student should they need it, but not oversharing, because that there is the danger there of getting a little too comfortable, especially if you are not too far removed from the age of your oldest students, because you do want to be friendly, but you don't want to be their buddy.
And I would encourage people to find subtle ways to show their vulnerability. For example, something as simple as on the syllabus, professor named Dr. Thomas Dickey, comma director of orchestral studies, and then in parentheses, I list my pronouns, he, him, his. I don't have to say that out loud, but the student knows that that's something that means something to Dr. Dickey, that this space is safe for everybody, you know, and whatever that might mean to you, you know, in terms of like gender, sexuality, identity, to race, to socioeconomic status, whatever, everybody is safe here. And for me, just something as simple as letting you know my name, how I like to be addressed, and what my pronouns are. I have found that that's a very subtle way to let people know that issues like that are quite important to me. Or, you know, programming Florence Price and just taking a quick moment to talk about, you know, Black Lives Matter, to talk about what was it like to be, you know, a Black woman composer in 1934, 35, when she wrote her first symphony. Just a couple minutes in rehearsal to talk about what that must have been like. It can be a very subtle way to let students know that, you know, this is really very important to me. We don't have to spend the whole rehearsal talking about it, but if it sparks someone to want to know more about it and they want to set up an office hour or a Zoom session, then of course I'm happy to go into it more, because I know that there are also students in that rehearsal for whom talking about Black Lives Matter or women composers is also uncomfortable for them for various other reasons. And everybody, in my opinion, has the right to feel safe, you know, in that space. And if, you know, that makes them feel uncomfortable or awkward, then I'm not going to, you know, go there, as it were. So I would encourage young teachers to find ways to subtly perhaps express your vulnerability, or let your vulnerability be known in a subtle way. It doesn't have to be like the big flashing, you know, yellow light sign. Yeah.
Well, and I love that you brought up the pronouns at the, you know, on the syllabus, or maybe at the end of your email title. Is I've been going back and forth, or whether or not I should do as such, because I deal with a pretty divided clientele, but equally represented, on whether or not that would make them feel welcome or unwelcome to see that. And really, if I think about it in my heart of hearts, the people for whom that might make them uncomfortable, to, you know, Nathan Rodall, he, him, his, you know, it's probably obvious to them that that is the case. And as much as it might make them uncomfortable, it's kind of just like, let's move past it. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, okay, weirdo Mr. Rodall put his pronouns when clearly, you know, he's got the beard and the getup and all that. But there are people in unique situations where they might look like me, but those pronouns don't feel right to them, and that's not my battle to fight. So for the people who are in that situation where they are maybe uncomfortable with the pronouns that are used about them, that creating that space for them to just know that it's probably obvious that Mr. Rodall is he, him, his, but by putting that at the end of, you know, my email train or on my syllabus, immediately they know that this is somebody who might know the dialogue that I'm a part of, and is somebody that I can take my issues to if there's somebody who is less than welcoming with maybe a they them pronoun situation. And it's just so simple. And for the people that it offends, it's really just like, we'll get past it.
Totally. You know, I mean, two things. One, for me, that's why I put it, it's the last thing I list as part of my signature. I want my name, my degree, the title I hold, and the institution where I work. And then, just in case anybody was wondering, these are my pronouns. I also have it on the bulletin board right outside my office. I've completed the, it's called the Safe Zone training. It's a program if people want to. It's about a 2-hour workshop that you go to once a year, and where you talk about all of these issues and then some, way beyond the scope of our chat today. You know, and then once you've completed that, you know, course, you are designated, or your office is designated as a safe space. And I don't tell people, oh, you can find my office, it's the one with the blank, blank, blank on it, or, you know, they just know when you walk past it, oh, that's what that means. Or in Dr. Dickey's email signature at the bottom, there is that brief passing line to clarify. I've also had sometimes when I've, like in the past, taught like this lecture class, you know, that was like a gen ed, I would just have the students, you know, on that first day or two, when I'm making the seating chart or clarifying the attendance records, I'll say, please, everybody, right now log into whatever and just send me a quick message with your seat number, your name, and how you wish to be called.
Mm.
I don't have to, it doesn't have to be out loud, because I would hate for a student who perhaps may appear one way, identifies as another, or wishes to be called by a whole other, situation. And so I just say, I can log into Canvas or whatever, and just send me a quick message of what seat are you in and how would you like me to address you? And then it's for my eyes only. It never has to be, made public, at least in that class. So yeah, finding ways to be inclusive yet safe yet also discreet, can be
Yes.
very important.
Discreet is such a, I was going to say subtle, but discreet is a much better word, because I'm sure, as you have, there will come a day in your teaching career, for people watching, where there's a student who is a freshman at the end of the year that is now a sophomore and is going by a different name now. And really, they just kind of need you to help them have it be a non-issue. And that sort of subtlety and discretion is everything. And if you haven't quite made the decision whether or not to do pronouns at the end of your email, that might be a really subtle, discreet way to just share, we're not making any political statements here. I'm just trying to show, for the people who need to see it, that I hear you. And if you need to bring something to me, I'm available. But to everybody else, it just doesn't matter. You probably already knew it's going to be Mr. Rodall. It was a non-issue, and there was just superlative information at the bottom for you. But that might be really, really necessary, helpful information for somebody to know that you are a person that they can go to when they need help or clarity.
Absolutely.
Well, this conversation certainly ended up in a place I did not expect, but nevertheless, very important.
Yeah.
It's the whole social emotional learning thing is something that I think we told ourselves we were always doing in music, but this time and some of the struggles that we have gone through more recently have kind of showed us ways that we might have been, especially in the orchestra world, a little more insensitive to some of those issues. And I hope anybody who's watching out there and hears us talking about it would be great to do a Florence Price piece, is that we're not going to throw Beethoven in the trash can. It's just adding to the repertoire list. I think a big hurdle we're going to deal with, going back to the beginning of this conversation, of getting more repertoire out there, more representation for people of color and female composers as well, is like in Texas, you are kind of handcuffed to the list of repertoire that you're able to program with your kids. And that's going to be a big battle to fight to get some of those pieces added to that list so that you are, obliged to, or allowed to, not obliged, but allowed to program those pieces at, a competition. I have never taught in a place that limits your repertoire choices, but I imagine that could be fairly difficult, although it is probably intended as a tool to make sure that every orchestra student has access to the same level of education. That's probably its intention, but now it's being a little bit limiting. So hopefully we can work together to get some of those new names on that list.
Well, and I would say, even if it ends up being a situation where you don't actually perform it in concert, take it to contest, just allowing yourself that one class period to just read it down, dig into it a little bit, polish it up, and play through it one more time, just so that name, the composer, or whatever, is somehow in that student's mind. That's something I'm actually really excited about this situation I'm in, of shorter rehearsals, fewer concerts. It's allowing me to spend like an entire class period or even a week just reading through music, or just exploring pieces that I was probably never going to program it, but wouldn't it be great fun to at least be exposed to it and then have conversations about it, and find, times outside of class to schedule Zoom chat or something like that. Allow yourself that luxury of just a day. We've lost lots of days during the pandemic, and I don't think losing one more rehearsal where we're not actually playing the contest pieces is going to bring to the demise of your program. If you think about that greater holistic picture of creating these well-rounded musicians who are familiar with a wide, body of composers, just allowing that one day to read down this piece of music, go for it, do it.
Well,
Indulge yourself.
in this unique time for those of us who are in a hybrid situation
Yeah.
is, when you have time to rehearse together, that's all you should be doing. That's probably all that you have time for, is to rehearse and play and make the music. And that has always been my philosophy for the classroom as well, is let's not waste any time, because I have very little faith that everybody practices. And that's a realistic assumption to be making. And as much time as possible, and I learned this more from the choir side, especially as you're trying to memorize music, that the more times that I had in choir to go through a piece of music, with the music in front of me, with the whole group, not just me in a practice room, the more opportunities I had to pass through the song without stopping, without doing the tedium of altos or still singing that F sharp low. That's a, kind of an individual problem, and it is probably just one person. To work with the whole group. As much time as you can spend on that, the quicker you're going to achieve those group goals, and the more individual growth I have during those group meetings.
Right.
And then if I'm the alto who is still singing F sharp flat, let's deal with that privately outside of the group rehearsal. Or if we read through that Florence Price piece, and then in our asynchronous meeting later that you are cordially required to watch, on Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever you get to it, the whenever you get to it assignments, then we can dig in and maybe have more of the lecture style presentation while making full use of our rehearsal time together. Because it is really tempting when you have the kids in front of you to kind of turn into a music history teacher. At least it is for me, especially if I'm excited by a particular piece of music. Like the right before school closed, we had started the Arensky variations on a theme of Tchaikovsky.
Nice.
And there is a lot of subtext to go through with that piece of music and the relationship between Arensky and Tchaikovsky. There's a lot to unpack there if you wanted to be, music history or music historian, or even just from a music theory perspective, the analysis of that piece of music is extremely interesting, but not necessarily a best use of class time in a your regular rehearsal situation, because cellos are going to have to work out some tenor clef, and the first violins are probably trying to figure out how those arpeggios even work in some of the harder variations. And further, I think this time has showed us how we can solve that, like the alto with the low F sharp problem. Is it's not helping the group to stop just to work with one section or one person. I mean, if it's like a nobody can move until we fix this thing, you got to fix it. Like if the basses are sitting back there playing F natural, way back there, deal with it.
Yeah.
But we've got to get the whole group playing for as much of the time as possible and deal with those section things in other ways. Yeah. I hope when we do get to the other side of this pandemic time that our music community continues to be as open and sharing with each other as we are right now, because I have, a A to Z list of professional or collegiate cello players, ready to hop on a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet with my cello students to talk about measure 3 on whatever piece we're working on.
Yeah.
Or introduce thumb position. I'm not a cello player. I can use a cello pretty well because that was part of my training in music ed class. But I am not the authority, and I should, the kids deserve to have that authority on cello performance. Introduce that skill to them, as I'm sure as you rely on your private studio faculty as a person in academia to help that trombone player who can't blow the low B flat get whatever air, I think air gym or whatever they call it. They have some low brass player. Yeah, there's some technique theory thing about air and blowing those low notes. But that's not a issue for the conductor to solve. That's similar to the social emotional learning thing, is identifying which are the problems that I am equipped to address. And sometimes it's let's bring in the professional in that particular area. And that shows our students a great deal of compassion that we have for ourselves and each other, that, hey, I'm the guy with the stick, but that doesn't mean I know everything. And when I don't know something, I'm sure how many times in rehearsal has somebody asked you, what does this weird German word mean? And you don't know it right on the spot. So, give me a minute to go look that up. Don't just give them the answer that you think is right when it may not be, because that might be the snarky kid who has the dictionary out already and wants to hear you, make a foible. But there's no shame in allowing your students to know that you don't think you are the final word on all things music. And the opportunities that it brings to the students to bring in other voices, other opinions, and more expertise.
That's one of the best pieces of advice, though, that I always give to my conducting students, is to have all those terms translated, because all it's going to take is that one time. You think about Tchaikovsky, the adjectives in the Tchaikovsky symphony, and there are words that you see used only in that symphony. And I told my students, all it's going to take is that first time for you to get caught off guard, for you to have lost all street cred in front of that orchestra. And I said, don't you ever get on the podium and not have all of those terms translated.
Oh, and Mozart uses some of the Italian. And I think, what is the tempo for the first movement of the Fifth Violin Concerto? And it's the only time he uses that Italian word. It's like strepitoso or something like that.
Yeah.
But you've got to know.
Which later composers, like, it's used a lot in Capriccio Espagnol with Korsakov, noisily. Why would you put that adjective on the Fifth Violin Concerto? That's a whole other conversation, perhaps. But yeah, I always tell my conducting students, don't you ever get on that podium and not have every single foreign term translated, or know exactly what your goal tempos are, because you lose your credibility right away.
And I'll out myself as I was that kid who was asking. I think we were working on, in Youth Symphony, the Der Rosenkavalier Suite. And I had never experienced the German language other than, ja and,
Guten Tag.
Yeah, Guten Tag, Sprechen Sie Deutsch, very basic. And then you see words like Empfundung and, mit Bogen gestrichen. And I just was like, hey, can you tell us what some of these are? And the conductor to which I refer knows all of the translations, but just kind of didn't have the time of day for it. And maybe would have been a good opportunity, because we were really struggling to play that piece of music. It's a difficult piece of music. And to know that, when we get to mit Empfundung, there may or may not be some retard going on, a little bit of rubato, because it means with expression. I mean, you might translate it a little differently, but that's a pretty okay translation. Expressively, it's going to inform the way the music is played. And I don't think we should just translate it all to English in the editions. I feel like we lose some authenticity. And anybody who speaks German out there knows there are German words that just don't translate. And the Italian words translate, but they don't sound as pretty.
But they don't have the initial intensity. You think about the Wagner Siegfried Idol. The edition I have, he's got the German, and then the editor has asterisk, and all of them at the bottom of the page, they have the Italian equivalents. And sometimes they're pretty good, and other times like, but the spirit of the German word, it just doesn't carry over into Italian. So.
Well, the Herzenwunden is one that's used somewhat frequently. Is like heartache, wow, or Herzensschmerz, or I think is another way to say that. That means something totally different than con brio, or not the same, not even close. Because one of them refers to speed, and the other refers to affect. Well, anyhow, typically at the end of my podcast, I ask the same question of if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice. But I think I'm going to have to come up with something new for my repeat offenders who have made appearances on the podcast. So I think my new question for return guests is going to be, a student sends you an email. Why should I stay in orchestra? What is your response?
Why should I stay in orchestra? Well, I don't take the cliche like why or why not answer, like, well, why shouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to stay in orchestra? But if a student sent me an email asking, Dr. Dickey, why should I stay in orchestra? I think I would have to respond, you belong in orchestra. You are a part of a family that is called orchestra. We need you in orchestra. You matter in orchestra. The title of my weekly email that I send out is called Orchestra Matters, and then I have the dates. And it's a play on that word of like orchestra matters and orchestra matters. So I would tell the student, you belong here, you are needed here, you are wanted here. Yeah.
I love that answer. That is fantastic. Hit the nail right on the head. But I think I am going to start inviting a lot of guests that I had on back in the spring. That's new year, new me, to talk about the very specific things that we're dealing with right now. And that is, you know, an email that I get not too frequently, but something that me and my colleagues are going to have to deal with in the coming months, especially as we, you know, turn the corner into the new year. If this doesn't look much different than it does now, or it looks worse, you know, what is going to be our response to that email? And my response is more or less what you said, is that your peers are counting on you, that you are an integral piece of the fabric of our culture. And in particular at Port Angeles High School, where orchestra is basically the only thing that people know about our town that aren't from our town. That you are the, you know, you're part of the fabric of the culture and the history of an entire town. If you quit orchestra, now you're not part of, you know, we're missing a link in the chain mail of our community, of what makes us great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Dickey. We are so glad to invite you back to this podcast, and I'm sure we will have a third appearance. Maybe at some point we can talk about organ repertoire. I would love to totally geek out on organ rep. My kids have been subject to entry music a couple of times in class of like Vidor 6, which I think is vastly under appreciated compared to the toccata from Vidor 5, of course. That's the one that, you know, Diane Bish just really runs away with. I'm not sure why she plays it so fast, although it is impressive. Well, I shan't talk about organ music before we go another 2 hours. But thank you so much. And
my friends.
We so appreciate the collegiality, no pun intended, of the entire music community right now coming together to support each other. Because us as teachers, this is not easy for us. As much as the students and families are struggling, we're really, you know, having a hard time getting through, of trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, or at least progress, amid this pandemic. And I think there are avenues where we can achieve those goals, and we talked about some of those today. So thank you so much, Dr. Dickey, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, bye guys.